Okay, project 5 and 6, which are upper and lower combined. But project 5 is the Kennedy Class 4, which we've talked about. It's very simple. We have a prescription of the anterior 4 teeth missing with some mesh and posts, apron on the canines, and embrasure clasps 5 and 6. I'll leave that there for a second. What we've done in advance is we've done a diagnostic setup, had created an index, and then that index we'll be able to utilize in the refractory model to locate our posts on top of our mesh exactly in the right location of 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, and 2, 2. As well as we are able to better approximate our external finishing line to minimize the bulkiness of acrylic lingual to the centrals and laterals, therefore increasing the phonetics for the client. First and foremost, we're going to put it in the surveyor. We're going to start with an analyzing rod. Now, in this nave surveyor, the analyzing rod is the same as the surveying rod. When we get into something larger, maybe in the commercial laboratory setting, we might have heated tips. And here's a 2 for 2-degree taper. And they're heated. And here they come in 1, 2, and 3. I've got a 0 degree. And you can see the taper, which is obviously a lot easier to fit the cast partial denture, as all your guide planes will be tapered outwards. So ours are difficult. If you haven't noticed that we are doing a 0 degree analyzing rod. And what I need to do is, since this is an aesthetic zone, try to minimize the guide plane or equalize the guide plane undercuts of mesial of canine and mesial of the other canine. And the undercuts on the molar are going to be, we're going to tilt it backwards a little bit, just barely capturing some undercut on the distal of 7, mesial of 5, mesial of 5, minimizing the guide planes. I can go back this way a little bit to the left. As you can see, I've got my analyzing table tight, but still loose enough that I can move it incrementally. I'm going to go back this way a bit. Not much undercut on the distal of the molars, equalizing the undercut. Especially with this molar, with this root exposure of number 6. But this is the prescription at hand. You can see the rest preparations interproximally done on 5 and 6. Once I'm satisfied with my path of insertion, let's mark that on the model. Use a pencil would be better, right? And then we can mark the height of contour with our lead graphite. Let me just try to expose some lead a little bit more, because they're quite long, these teeth. Height of contour of 6. Oops, don't lift the table now. 5. 3. The linguals are a little high. But we will be on or above with our reciprocating arms. We will be on or above. Try to bring some lighting in so it's not casting as many shadows. So we've got the height of contour. We don't need the lead. Oh, how could I forget to tripod the model. Three widely spaced points. Could have been a little bit wider, but that'll suffice since I also have the land areas of the model marked. So try to be symmetrical with your bullseye hash marks. Cross it at 90 degrees, circle it. So they all look roughly the same dimensions. I'm going to go to 0.25 undercut gauge for the 0.25 undercut gauge for the embrasure clasp. I'm going to mark where this, I lift it up until it touches the tooth just below the height of contour. Sorry, I was off the screen here. You can see the red dot I've made. So these will be the terminal ends of my embrasure clasp retentive arms. Number 5 will cover 1/3 to 1/2. And number 6, not more than 1/3. It's not that flexible. And I'll stay close to the survey line here, on above it. And I'll come into the rest position. And there you have my embrasure clasp outlined. I'm going to sharpen my blue pencil as it's a little dull. Let's do the other side now. I've marked the tooth ever so slightly, since my eyesight is, I can just make a little tiny scratch. 1/3 on or above. Stay right on it here. I don't want to fall into that interproximal space of my is there a reason why I zoomed in so much? There we go. I stayed close to the survey line here on the embrasure clasp of the 2/6, and then dipping just below at the last 1/3. As well as now on the bicuspid, I've marked the terminal end. About 1/2, I'm going to stay above. This is where we all run into trouble, by putting their wax arms right below that survey line. There's no way that's going to disengage. On the reciprocal side, on or above with the blue line, which is passive, which is the reciprocating arms. Outline the rest areas. Careful not to scratch the model. Any chips, scratches, or bumps This framework will not fit in the patient's mouth. And this is a real critical area, these sharp areas around these rest preparations of these embrasure clasps, or Bonwell's clasp, or double E clasps, or double Akers clasps, whichever term you would like to use. Now I'm going to apron the canine 3 to 5 millimeters below. Keep very specific on your drawings. And very light on your wax spatula, which doesn't have to be a big, thick, chunky framework. Very nice and light. And last but not least, if you have a hard time getting symmetrical, mark the midpoint. And I'll try to be symmetrical as my hand just slipped. Perfect. There we go. If you want to have a little dipsy-do in here, you can do that. Just put your only artistic freedom here in the framework. And keep in mind this external finishing line, which I've moved a little bit anterior, but I want to have this incisive papilla covered in acrylic. I don't want to have this covered in metal, the incisive papilla, because this could be slightly mobile and need to be relieved. Next is the blockout and the ledging, which you've done many times before. We'll do it together again here. Don't rush. You need the analyzing rod back. Do not change the path of insertion of your model. And the analyzing rod, if I can, an example on the anterior, is used to scrape away excess wax on the guide plane. Now I can see where I've marked it in lead, so I know not to go above that. And this is blocking out the undercut to facilitate the fitting of my partial denture. And here it's a little bit soft, and you can see me just scraping away the wax. And the excess down by the tissue I can take off. And there now we have our guide plane blocked out below the height of contour. Let's zoom up here again. Below the height of contour. The gingival margin of the apron, very light. If you don't add wax around the free gingival margin of this apron, then you will just relieve it in chrome. I think it's easier to do the wax. On the lingual side, interproximal tissue surface, I want to block this out. I don't want to jam metal into that free gingival margin or interproximal space of the lingual of 5 and 6. And I can use the analyzing rod to take away any excess. If you add too much wax here or your ledges are pronounced, then your minor connector will be away and leaving a big space. On the outside now, I am free to do this freehand. I'll use a bigger spatula, carry a little more wax. You can create these ledges freehand. I've done all the work in the survey and the freehand drawing of my retentive arms. And now I'm going to create ledges here to guide me in my wax up of exact location, very, very exact or very close to that of my retentive arms. There's no need to rush. Enjoy the journey here. and do neat work as if you were waxing a margin on a crown. That's the attention to detail that I'd like you to use on your wax ledging, as if you were doing margin wax on your full gold crown. Now I've added wax just below, and now's the time I can start building it up. Now, if you keep in mind, I'm below my red line about the profile thickness of a wax pattern clasp, because I want that clasp to be right on the red line. Little semantics. But if you go right up to the red line, then your clasp will be too high, being non-engaging. I've chosen this case with some large abutment teeth to better visualize the undercuts. So case 5 is a Kennedy Class 4 with the index that we'll use to locate in our wax up the posts on top of the mesh, exact location. And the lower is the Kennedy Class 2 Modification 1, which we'll get working on. And we're going to do the Blockout analog. And then we're going to do the Blockout digital upstairs as well. And if time permitting, if we can print our digital file, would be fantastic. But for sure, we will wax and cast analog, since we have that capability at our disposal. And we have the time still for that. I'd like this case to be our best one of the year. That'll show our progression of casting 101, so to speak, our partial denture design. I mean, our first one was exploratory. We made some errors along the way with 2 and 3 and 4, and now we're on 5 and 6. We should be self-correcting and better understanding of what's necessary in order to achieve some predictable results. It's not easy. It can be a little frustrating at times, but I think if we take our time, work diligently, we'll manage. Now here is something I want to spend some time on. If you noticed in blue here, I've put the reciprocal arms of number 6 and number 5. And ideally in the laboratory, I probably wouldn't ledge this. I can visualize, and my hand-eye coordination is pretty good to visualize where the height of contour is on the lingual here for these reciprocal arms. But being a teaching institution, they may examination time, not in this class, but on the Ontario provincial-wide exams, ask you to ledge this clasp. But you must keep in mind the ledge, try not to create the ledge past, or let's say the first half of the clasp, do not ledge. I don't want to have a ledge into the interproximal area affecting my guide plane. If you create the ledge all the way to the guide plane, which many students have done in the past, you will have a huge void under your guide plane. Visualize this here now. This is my guide plane going up here, right? And I've blocked out the undercut of the interproximal here, right, with wax. But don't create a ledge where my guide plane or my minor connector, will go right up here to the rest position. You can create the ledge on the distal half or distal 2/3 of the bicuspid and the molar. I think that's enough. And that's going to stop us from making that error. I've seen too many students start ledging all the way into the interproximal space on the lingual, and then we have this huge space, and then now we have an ill-fitting denture, and then it's like, wow, it's unacceptable. Even though sometimes, frustratingly, the rest of the prosthetic was fantastic. But this is interproximally blocked out, and then ledged for the reciprocal arms, ledged for the retentive arms. And I'll continue to do the other side to reinforce what I'm talking about. At this time, my expectation is that we're not creating any more errors on our ledges as we have done on the previous projects. It's time to start self-correcting. And like I said, try to aim that these last 2 units for the home stretch of DENT 2004 are our best ones. Without, proper blocking out, it's very difficult to fin the chrome partial, and I'm sure you've witnessed it already with your previous projects, how frustrating it can be when the frameworks don't fit without a lot of adjustment. There'll always be some adjustment, and then with experience, you'll know in advance at the rough trimming stage of where those problematic areas are and eliminate them. From experience, you'll already know where the issues are going to lie. And it's always the guide planes. It's always around the rest preparations of the guide plane, the sharp areas. Tread really carefully, and that's why we make duplicate models. So we use the duplicate model not for the practitioner or the denturist or whoever to have a duplicate model for their acrylic work. The duplicate model is for us, so we don't kind of injure the master model in trial and error of fitting. I mean, fitting is a job in itself in a commercial laboratory, where that is someone's sole job all day long, is to fit the frameworks after they've been rough trimmed, sandblasted, and deplated. Then they go to be fit, a little bit of fine-tuned trimming, and then polish. Rubber point, rubber wheel. And some of us are struggling with the high shine of polish. I have some samples at the front of polish, and if it doesn't match that, then yours is not polished enough. I've been pretty liberal in the evaluation guide. I mean, my expectation is realistic for, let's say, the beginner partial denture technician. It's pretty realistic and forgiving, but in a commercial setting, it's zero tolerance of scratches and polishes and fitting and spaces and thickness and bulkiness and external finishing lines and spaces around the rest area. I mean, there's zero tolerance in the commercial laboratory. But our job here as students is we're learning as we go. And we will always continue to learn as we go, self-correcting, self-actualizing, and then each day becoming a better dental technology version of ourselves. A few days is a step backwards, but generally the trajectory is onwards and upwards. And that's created by many things, but mostly is creating errors and the painfulness of creating errors. And we want to avoid that type of feeling. So then we correct and say, okay, we can't do that anymore. Because it's about consistency and predictability and predictable results in the dental laboratory. And if you read a lot of articles, like in Lab Management Today, I mean, most practitioners are about consistency. That the consistency from laboratories is waning sometimes. This is a variety of reasons. It could be the cases themselves, the impressions, but most likely different technicians working on different projects at different times, creating consistent results. But if we have the same training, then we can be more predictable in those results. And we shouldn't just have excuses. So I've got my preparation wax. Make sure your models are nice and dry when you're blocking out, because this, I don't want it to lift in the silicone duplication stage. Take a nice sharp scalpel number 11 blade and follow your pencil line exactly as I've done. But I've taken it off because I've noticed that as we tried to talk about consistency and errors, I have not blocked out the guide plane on number 1-3. I was too busy blinded by my own words or this camera in front of me, or just lost track of where I was. But there's nothing wrong with that. I picked up my error before I had gone too far. If I did happen to remove the model from the surveyor, I have my, I'm off screen. I have my tripod marks. Scrape away any excess below the height of contour of the guide plane off the intaglio surface if there's leftover. That's just, and the free gingival margin below the lingual of the cane, we're going to block out. Now we can put back my spacer wax. Now the spacer wax comes in different thicknesses. The other day we talked about altered cast and doubling the thickness to alleviate room for impression material of a secondary split model impression or double impression or altered cast or split cast, whatever term they want to use. I'm going to abort this one. It seems like my model is a touch wet and my wax is a touch old, but that's fine. We'll persevere. Nothing unusual. We'll start with a fresh piece and kind of beat that one up. Let me get this down here. There we go. And now, exactly on my internal finishing line of what this line is creating, internal finishing line. Nice and sharp. Nice and sharp internal finishing line. And then I'll take some base plate wax and seal this very good here because I don't want any lifting. I don't want any silicone underneath. Now I'm way down in the sulcus here, so I'm kind of blocking it out for the silicone. There's no way I'm going to have mesh lattice retention into the, attached and detached mucosa junction. There's no way. But it's easier for me to fill it up with wax and seal it, stop any silicone. Let me just kind of heat up my iron here a bit, make sure there's no lifting. And there you have it, the Kennedy Class 4. Embrasure Class 5 and 6, aprons on the canines. And then we will, approximate with our diagnostic setup, the wax up of the internal finishing line as well as the, external finishing line as well as the post location. One thing left to do is the food line or the scribe line. With the pressure induction casting method, it's really not necessary to do this, but it is a good guide for us as beginners to visualize the major connector extensions on the palate And then when we're trimming, we'll be able to better trim exactly the location of where our finishing lines end. So we're going to take an instrument, number 7. Here I got my, whatever this one's called, Hollenbach. And then consistence of depth and width. Not as heavy around the median suture line, as this is a very strong bone here. We don't want to, cut that in half and have the denture impinging through this area too tightly, because the dentist will have to relieve most likely on the median suture line. But we have a little bit more submucosa here on the side of the palate. Just a little light through the center. Now I'm going to try to avoid any straight lines. As you can see, I've got a little, and any rugais don't injure. Gone just behind them here. So I got the posterior food line and the left and right 3 to 5 millimeters engaging up to the aprons of the canines. This is going to be created in the anterior. Oh my goodness. This is going to be created in the anterior of my internal finishing line. So I've got the left or the patient's right side down here. And this will be the extensions of my wax up and my trimming and the major connector. Okay, so there's the Blockout with ledging, path of insertion for the Kennedy Class 4 Project 5.